Whenever there is light, there's always a shadow. During the Path of Exile 2 livestream, while we were preventing our unique totems from hardening into obsidian levels, other people were nitpicking some rather superfluous stuff. These art pieces look like the ones that launch with League of Legends. Is she pooping? What is going on? Gemlink's face looked like he lost a gem and his ass just found it. These were the comments that I couldn't stop myself from reading regarding some Path of Exile 2 Ascendancy splashards. Well, not literally, because the original comments weren't particularly funny, like entitlement and humor rarely go hand in hand. However, sometimes within these seemingly ridiculous comments, one may find small pieces of truth. It's also worth noting that foolish remarks don't necessarily reflect on the intelligence of the person making them. We all said stupid fucking shit in the past at one point or another, so let's just examine these claims objectively to see whether they are off base as they seem, or if there is some validity to them after all. Are these splashards bad? Plainly put, no. Could they be improved though? Absolutely. Anything can. You can iterate something endlessly, but at a certain point, you're just wasting time. And time is a key factor here. Would you prefer GGG to allocate resources towards slightly enhancing an Ascendancy splashard, or towards creating new map assets, gear bases, or even some extra full patterns for the much anticipated Druid's bear form? It's also worth noting that GGG has incredibly talented artists. Just take a look at some of this concept art. It's clear that competence isn't the issue here. The answer is quite simple. These illustrations serves a purpose. They were likely created under tight deadlines, with other priorities taking precedence. In fact, some of them, like the Infernalist for example, I would say they look downright incredible. As a graphic designer and an illustrator with a background in color theory, I will share my honest opinion, but feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments below. I'm not a source of truth, just opinions, right? With that clarification out of the way, let's just explore why some of them may feel a little bit underwhelming for some of you, shall we? Let's just discuss first some recurring patterns and themes that I notice across all of them. One issue that immediately catches my eye is the lack of depth between the character, the background, and the overall framing of the scene. This creates a sense of disconnect that impacts the composition as a whole. And this issue often emerges from having a washed-out background contrasted with a highly detailed character. This is not a problem, for example, with the Infernalist, as she blends seamlessly with this scene thanks to the dynamic use of fire as an unifying element. However, it's noticeable in several of the other examples, where the backgrounds feel more like afterthoughts. This is a common trait in sketch artwork, where most of the effort goes into refining the main character or element, while the background remains secondary, reduced to vague detail that sometimes blend awkwardly with the subject silhouette. You can spot some traces of a sketch-style art direction here, for example, and there. Now, take this piece as an example. When we identify the darkest and brightest tones, we notice that the darkest areas could be deeper and the bright areas could be more pronounced. Instead, most of the tonal values are crowded in the mid-range, which flattens the image. By stretching these values through a bit of editing, the scene gains more depth and impact. While my adjustments here are a little bit exaggerated, obviously, and not the ideal solution, they help illustrate how contrast can transform the composition. Another factor which doesn't really help the composition is the lack of dynamism and connection between different elements in the shot. Each character is rigidly centered, both vertically and horizontally, with surrounding elements occupying their own distinct spaces, and there's little to no connection between these components. To explain this better, remember when you were a kid and you were asked to draw a house on a sheet of paper? Typically we will put the house in one spot, the sun in another, the tree somewhere else, and maybe add a cloud in there if there's some leftover space. Everything was placed separately to fill the whole page. It was very rare for us to draw, like for example, a large sun behind the house, or maybe the branches of the tree interacting a little bit with the clouds. That mostly never happens. These elements didn't interact dynamically with each other. And speaking of dynamism, some of the people I've spoken to about these splash arts have compared them to those from games like League of Legends. It's important to acknowledge that Riot Games sets a very high standard with some of the cleanest, most polished artwork in the industry. So it's not really a fair comparison given the unknown limitations GGG probably had. However, Riot's work is a perfect example of how dynamism can elevate an image. Their splash arts often masterfully connect elements, layering them in ways that feel intentional and alive, creating a sense of motion and storytelling within a single frame. It's a valuable point of reference for understanding what makes compositions truly stand out. Now, let's take a look, for example, at the difference between these two splash arts. It's clear that one design is far superior than the other, particularly in terms of coloring and detail. However, let's set aside the colors for now and focus purely on dynamism. Some elements that reinforce that are, for example, the character, which is placed close to the camera and is also partially cropped, creating an illusion of movement, drawing the viewer into the scene. For example, which of these two look more dynamic to you? Well, the one on the left, right? Another resource is the position of the camera, playing with different angles instead of the boring shoulder height directly in front of the subject position. Additionally, having the character occupy the same amount of space or even more than the background establishes a clear hierarchy where the composition prioritizes the character over the static background. This approach makes the scene feel more dynamic and engaging as the focus shifts naturally to the subject rather than being evenly distributed. Going back to the Path of Exile 2 splash arts, you can see now why the most dynamic designs are the Infernalists due to having some skeletons close to the camera, the Stormweaver thanks to the lighting bouncing around, and the Witch Hunter, which benefits greatly from the unique camera angle. Now let's go through the rest of them one by one. This one is really strong overall. The only adjustment I would suggest is darkening the back of the cave to match the darker tones of the stones in the foreground, giving it a more consistent look. For the other Monk Ascendancy splash art, the leaves would have more depth if they were coming towards the camera, creating a greater sense of space instead of coming from the sides, right? In this one, which is the Deadeye, the art feels a little bit off with the blue filter. It's a bit overwhelming and there's no clear light source to justify it. If we use this splash art from League of Legends as an example, it uses blue hues effectively by showing multiple light sources: the glow from Oriana's waist, Brom's skill, and Anivia's wing. Also, in the Deadeye piece, the torches illuminate the character's face but fail to light up the surrounding branches. A more consistent application of light might help balance this out. For these two, I don't have the full images, but from what I can see they seem fine overall. Maybe the Blood Mage design would benefit more from having a more saturated clothing to match the intensity of the blood bending details, creating like a stronger visual impact. Titan, however, looks fantastic, no issues there. When looking at the Warbringers, the armor is extremely detailed, which really stands out more when comparing to the sketchy, less detailed background and Hina's. It might help to either add some details to the background or just simplify the armor a bit to create a better balance. And finally, we have the Gemlink Legionnaire Ascendancy. This class is going to be amazing for min-maxing, obviously. And the main issue with this design is the very stiff and unnatural pose, especially the face, which is pretty weird, like he's looking straight to the camera with his eyes like this. A little bit more dynamic positioning could make the character feel more alive. I would also recommend adding some sort of lighting to the front of the character because there is a beam of light coming from the corner and the skin looks a little bit too orange. Additionally, saturating the gems on his body a little bit more would really help them pop. After all, they are key to defining this ascendancy. Now, to wrap things up, it's really clear that these splash arts, while not perfect by any means, showcase a lot of effort and talent from the artists. They are definitely areas where they could be enhanced, whether through lighting, depth, or dynamism, as we talked earlier, but that's the beauty of the creative process. There's always room for improvement and refining. At the end of the day, these illustrations serve their purpose really well, and within time, I'm sure 100% that the team at GGG will continue to evolve their art style, bringing us even more incredible designs. So let's appreciate the hard work that went into them and look forward to what's next. I would love to hear your thoughts on what's your opinions about these splash arts, so drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks again for watching, see you in the next one, un abrazo, as always.